One configuration that we'll need to do on the application if you're using proprietary cards is we're going to need to set up any sort of restrictions for the products that you would like to restrict by, if you are in fact restricting by products. So the first thing we'll need to do is come under Settings and then Organization. And then we have our products table and we have our product restrictions. Before we enable these, you'll want to make sure that you go through our section on setting up the proprietary card setup, just to ensure that you have proprietary cards enabled and you do have the certain restriction type that you would like to enable going forward. If this is turned off, you may not be able to get past this future step when you're actually creating a card. So you'll want to check this first. Jumping into the products table here, what we're going to see is just some options for gallons, liters, and quarts. If you jump over to the next tab, it's going to show you your fuel type codes that are set up in the system. When the system is first configured, we'll want to have your technician who configured your fuel site controller finish that process and ensure that the controller is set up in the way that you would like it. And then we'll come in here and we'll actually go to our sync page and we'll read those site settings from your fuel site controller and we'll read the global settings from your fuel site controller. And that's going to populate this list here for the correct fuel type codes that you're using on your given pump numbers. So what we'll want to do is you'll want to come in here and just verify that your codes are set up with the correct names and they're labeled correctly so that the application kind of understands what fuel type codes you're dispensing. If this step is skipped, then on your dashboard page, when it's displaying your fuel type codes in the transactions graphics, those fuel type codes will be wrong if they're not configured correctly here. So we'll want to do this setup as part of the initial setup in the application. Read the site settings and global settings to verify all of these codes are accurate. And if they're not accurate, we need to go ahead and change them. So to change them, you'll come in here, you'll select the fuel type code that's wrong, and over here on the right, you could simply just rename them what you'd like and fix any of the other parameters that are wrong, and then you'll go ahead and hit save. If all of these are correct fuel type codes, then you can simply just leave them as is. Once we have the products configured in the application with the correct names and all the fuel type codes are correct, we can work on product restrictions and quantity restrictions in the application. Once again, these settings should be read from your fuel site controller after the controller is already configured, so that this information is carried over into the application. However, I do want to show you how we can make changes in the application if we're missing a restriction that's already enabled on the controller, how you can simply add it here. Or if the initial setup is being done by a technician within the application, we can set it up here initially, and then we can send the settings back down using that sync page. Actually do the send global settings and send site settings down. And that'll take these kind of restrictions and push them into the fuel site controller. So coming over here on the right, you'll have product restrictions followed by quantity restrictions. To set up a product restriction is really easy. You just need to select the restriction code. 00 is going to be not restricted. 01 we can define as which fuel type codes are we going to allow people with this restriction to use. So if we look over here on the right, we'll have some checkboxes or it'll be empty. And we simply need to check the box for the product codes that we would like this particular, say, driver or vehicle to be restricted by. Anything enabled here will be allowed to be fueled by this particular person. Anything that's unchecked will be denied when they actually try to fuel. So if, for example, this particular restriction for code 1, I have drivers that I only want to be able to fuel unleaded. So we'll go ahead and just uncheck anything here that's not unleaded, and then we're going to just simply hit save. Once that is saved, then when we go to the card creation process, we're going to have a drop-down list, and when we select code 1, it's simply going to say unleaded, which is going to represent the codes that we're currently using for this restriction. We do the same thing for any of the other restriction codes. So code 2, say I might have a need to only allow for certain types of diesel. You could just select those and then hit save. And then we're going to set up the quantity restrictions in the same way. It's going to be a little bit different because there's not checkboxes. You're going to simply have a table of restrictions. So for example, this is code 1 and this is code 2. So currently they're both set up for 40 gallons. So if you are using code 1, that person will be able to fuel 40 gallons, and then after 40 gallons, the transaction will be terminated. If we want to change these codes, we simply just come in here, punch in the restriction gallon amount that we would like, and then we're just going to hit save. And then on code 1, we're going to be restricted by 20 gallons instead of 40 gallons. Once again, I just want to reiterate that if you just simply change it here and we don't send the settings using the sync, or if we don't set this on the fuel site controller, these will not actually take effect until you do so. So if you have a mismatch of what you would expect to see and what's set up in the application, you may want to just double check that the settings are correct on the fuel site controller. So once we have the quantity and the product restrictions set up, you can go into the cards menu and create a new card. And we'll dive into the card creation process here in another lesson. But you'll see your product restrictions and quantity restrictions, and this is going to be that list that we just predefined for those restrictions. So if I selected code 1 here, we have unleaded only. If I select code 2, we have the certain types of diesel that we are going to allow this particular person to fuel. And that's pretty much all you need to do to configure quantity restrictions and product restrictions.